I recall when one of our recent high school graduates had completed kindergarten a number of years ago. I asked her then what she thought of school. She thought for a moment and said, "Well, it's fun, but I'm not sure I'm going back." To which I responded, "Well, why not?" She said, "Well, I've already learned everything in kindergarten." It seems the older I get, the more I realize I don't know things. We return to our study of Acts, and we discover here a man who finds out he also has much to learn. We follow Paul to Ephesus, and he leaves there in charge of that new congregation, fellow tent makers, a couple named Priscilla and Aquila. They're going to navigate things here while he goes to Jerusalem. Well, soon after his departure, a new face arrives in town. Acts 18, verse 24. A Jew named Apollos, native of Alexandria, came to Ephesus. This verse refers to a number of important things about him that we learn here. First of all, that he's educated. The text tells us that he was a learned man. Alexandria was the largest city at that time in the Roman Empire, and it's one of the leading intellectual meccas of the world, and especially the Hellenistic world. Alexandria was built, for example, around a massive museum and a 400,000 volume library. Apollos was not only educated, he's a believer. The passage says that he had a thorough knowledge of the scriptures. Alexandria had a thriving Jewish population, and it was here that Jewish scholars first translated the first Greek version of the Old Testament called the Septuagint. Furthermore, Apollos is a Christian. Now, generally speaking, a Christian is anyone who follows Christ, and he did. Verse 25 says he had been instructed in the way of the Lord. But apparently he heard this teaching from one perhaps had been a disciple of John, and it was not a complete understanding of the gospel. But we are told that he preaches passionately, the verse reveals, with great fervor. And he didn't simply preach with great passion, he also preached accurately, we're told. It would seem like Apollos is the perfect preacher, except for one significant problem. Verse 25 concludes he knew only the baptism of John. Likely been taught by those that knew Christ during his earthly ministry and the teachings about Christ, but didn't know the full gospel of the death, burial, and resurrection, how Christ had instituted a new baptism. One might consider then Apollos an enemy of the cross. He is teaching falsely, one who should be confronted, challenged, condemned. Apollos most certainly needs to learn more accurately the truth, but he's never portrayed here as an enemy of the cross, just one who's ignorant of it. Now enters Priscilla and Aquila. They encounter him in verse 26. He began to speak boldly in the synagogue. Their response to him is notable. First of all, we're told that they heard him. When someone says something we don't necessarily agree with or acts in a way that maybe is offensive to us, the natural reaction is to avoid them or to attack them, fight or flight. But they pause and they spend time understanding him. They listen to him, and in so doing, show their interest and openness. Furthermore, they invite him, we're told, into their home. So after listening, they take action. Note what they don't do. They don't publicly challenge him or ridicule him. This is important to recognize because that only puts a person on a defensive place, and they're not going to hear anything said. Maybe a good lesson for many people who decide to air out their dirty laundry online. Whatever comes of that's constructive out of such things. No, they invite them into the privacy of their home and offer him hospitality, and there they teach. A good lesson for parents: punish in private, praise in public. Thirdly, here they explained them with him in their home. We're told the way of God more adequately. When the time was right, they now share with him the truth of Christ, the good news. I recall a time at dinner years ago when my middle son knew something that my firstborn son didn't know. That doesn't happen all that frequently. One who is older, such for example in this, maybe if you have an older sibling, you might understand the tension. So the middle son didn't want to let this moment pass. He just kept probing the older brother. You didn't know that? I can't believe you didn't know that. The older one said, how did you know that? And the middle one said, I figured it out in my mind. But he wouldn't let it go. I can't believe you didn't know that. And then he said, I could offer you some tutoring if you'd like. And he just kept coming back. I think I have some things I could impart to you if you gave me a chance to teach you. Finally, the ridiculing got out of control, and I put the kibosh on it. Said, all right, that's it. No more talking to each other like that. So there was this moment of silence, and then my middle son turned to me and said, Dad, I love Abe like a brother, but I'm concerned about him sometimes. We all find those moments when we're confronted with something, our own ignorance, something to learn. And I don't know about you, but I don't like learning things from other people that I was wrong about. But there's something about that which we might grow through. The truth is we're all ignorant. There are things we don't know, information we lack. Even biblically, there's much we don't know and can learn from others. We see some of the top leaders in the church often quite ignorant. Those such as Peter or Paul, who are fully convinced of one thing, only to find out that they were 100% wrong. There are two responses often people have today in the world. First is, I don't care to learn. And this is probably the most common today. People just, I don't care, especially when it comes to scriptures. There's a lackadaisical view, apathetic view about learning more clearly the truth of God's will. But there's a second response that's often found even among religious people, and that is that I don't need to learn. I learned it all already. Nothing more to grow from. And a loss of humility and curiosity sets us in sometimes a very stagnant spiritual state. For all the mighty gifts and talents Apollos had, there was still much to learn. But perhaps most impressive of him is his openness, like those noble-minded Bereans, to hear something and to learn from it, even from mere tent makers who brought this truth more clearly to him. Our passage concludes, Acts 18:27, when Apollos wanted to go to Achaia, the brothers encouraged him and wrote to the disciples there to welcome him. On arriving, he was a great help to those who by grace had believed, for he vigorously refuted the Jews in public debate, proving from scriptures that Jesus was indeed the Christ. Apollos, yes, was not teaching accurately the gospel. But when he learned more clearly, he will become an incredible resource for the Lord, such that later on, some will claim him one of the top leaders in the church. Perhaps the Lord wants to teach you something today. Maybe the lesson will come through someone that you might not expect to teach you. Will you learn the lesson? May grace and peace be multiplied to you in the name of God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ.